All right, day one in the portal is in the books, and Texas A&M has had 17 players enter the portal out of the team on day one. And to compare, last year, the total number during a coaching change, the exit of Jimbo, the subsequent exodus of his recruited players leaving the program, well, the number was 31. So you more than got halfway through that number on day one. This season, year two, incoming of Mike Elko. Is it time to panic? Is this the level of program attrition that might suggest program instability? Because I thought year two was supposed to be when the team came together. I thought this was when there was supposed to be an amazing influx of talent and not players like Cyrus Allen in a position of need leaving, players like Malik Silla, Ian White, defensive ends that you need right now, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy at defensive tackle. Those guys leave. So why still be optimistic? So I'm going to suggest, and I'm not sure this is going to make you feel better or worse about the situation and the landscape of college football, that this is just the game we're playing now. The portal exists to give this exact caliber of player that A&M is losing a chance to start somewhere else, a chance to make a name for themselves, in a lot of these players' cases, with minimal eligibility remaining in their college careers. So A&M has lost 17 non-starter players, at least as of our most recent games. These guys haven't been starters. Some of them rotational guys. And though it does sting to lose depth, that's exactly what the portal is designed for. So today, I want to take a glance at what has already happened in the portal, and then take a look at where the roster stands and what the priority list might look like going forward in the portal. I think some of those answers are very obvious, but I want to explore that, look at the depth chart that's remaining now at this point. And, this thing's just getting started, man. By the time you see this video, there might be a lot more action, and I'm sure you'll have more entries. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's one or two surprise entries into the portal over the next few days for Texas A&M. That's just the game we're playing now. That's just how this works. But today's the day they officially entered. While they could have announced it days ago, today's the day that the teams can actually contact these guys, allegedly. Now, you hear about tampering, you hear about under-the-table deals, but as of right now, as of this day, Monday, players are getting courted, players are taking visits, scheduling visits. So a lot of stuff's happening now. Let's get you up to date, and let's look forward into this ongoing portal window. So thank you guys for being here. If you guys could like and subscribe, that would help me greatly. I'm going to drop this video, and I'm going to put out a couple more pretty quickly. By the time you're seeing this, they might be out. I actually want to zoom into a couple of position groups specifically, a couple of areas where a lot of Aggies are getting pretty nervous, specifically around the O-line, D-line. I want to kind of zoom into those position groups, whereas today's video will kind of be the big picture getting into this portal era. So thank you guys for being here. So to start, I want to go through the portal names that have already entered on day one. All right, so this is done by Gig'em247. They put the list out, and keep in mind, guys, I'm not an insider. I'm not a guy that's calling people. I'm not a guy in the know. I simply react and try to contextualize things that are readily available. So nothing I bring up in these videos will be from behind paywalls. This is all general information, and we're going to explore this stuff together. So if you guys have comments or disagree with what I have to say as we go, make sure you guys put that in the comments below. But you can see Kevin Longstreet's in here. His brother committed to USC. No surprise, him entering the portal. Hasn't done anything at A&M thus far. Has to find opportunity elsewhere. That's okay. Malik Silla was a big one. Edge rusher, multi-year project, came in undersized, but had some raw ability, had long arms, had the ability to get after it and kind of bend and be quick as an edge rusher. And he looked good in mop-up duty in the New Mexico State game, got maybe a snap or two per game, and, maybe there was a path for him to have some playing time next year, but you still really can't blame the guy for looking for a solidified starter caliber role elsewhere. So that one, though that one does sting, that was not necessarily surprising. Martrell Harris was a guy that I once deemed a very pivotal player in this program's arc going forward, and it never panned out. You brought in other linebackers that have since passed him up, guys like Scooby Williams, Damian Sanford, obviously Torian York. And Martrell was kind of left the odd man out, didn't really have much production, so he's going to look for a home elsewhere. Understand that one. Mike Atis was an interesting one, because that one comes out of a room that you're obviously looking for players out of, and that's the receiver room. We'll talk a lot about that over the next few days. He's in the portal now, and he was kind of a long-term project, had all the athleticism in the world, a speed guy, and never really panned out. Didn't see the field at all, really consistently throughout the year. I think he got some sporadic reps in the first game versus Notre Dame, but we never really saw him since then. And it kind of sucks to lose that shot. That's one that does hurt in a room that you don't want to lose guys out of. But again, not a guy with experience, not really a guy you were necessarily banking on. But that does kind of oppose the next one, and I would say this is the biggest hit so far in TJ Shanahan. And alone, not the worst hit, but when you combine it with the name down here, Cam Dewberry, those were your backup interior O-linemen this year, and it sucks to see those guys lose. However, there is a world where all 5 starting offensive linemen return next year pending a couple decisions. So, again, backups looking for homes elsewhere. Cam Dewberry, I believe, only has 1 or 2 years of eligibility left. He needs to find a starting spot because he's capable of starting somewhere. Whereas here, he'd have to fight for that, and it would be a battle he starts from behind it. TJ Shanahan's the more surprising one, as I suggested, because he's a young guy with 3 years of eligibility left. So a team's going to be very happy to get a guy like that, obviously young, raw player, made his fair share of mistakes, but also showed some power, some grit, was a very kind of blue-collar player. And you hate to lose a guy like that. It's undeniable, and I think it's the worst one we're seeing on this list right now. King and Andrews, backup punter. A&M recruits the kicking position, all the special teams positions very well. Not a concern right now, especially when you have 2 or 3 more years of Tyler White still coming. Chance Johnson, similar conversation to Martrell Harris, just got passed up by other guys. Damian Sanford, a lot of time left. Torrin York, probably 2 years left. Scooby's coming back. And then we really like Jernigan and Lockhart as prospects for the future. So it makes sense for a guy like Chance Johnson to move on. Samu Tamu Amu Pepe, a guy that I thought might have a gadget role in short yard situations early in his college career. Proved not to be the case. Proved to be more of a long-term development guy. Who knows what he would have had next year as a role when you're losing a lot of D linemen and you're kind of rebuilding that rotation at D line. But he decides to look elsewhere, and I would suggest that you can find pieces to fill in this gap here. Josh Salazar, guy that transferred in last year, bet on himself, knew there was a big competition he was jumping into, and he couldn't find places to play. He couldn't find a spot to play. He's going to look elsewhere for his last year of eligibility. Another guy that you really can't blame for moving on. Hunter Erb, a guy that got some good reports coming out of camps, a guy that maybe would have carved out a role at tackle in the coming years. But this coming year, it looks like you have a lot of tackles potentially returning, and you're bringing a lot in through recruiting right now. It would have been a tight battle. So it's not necessarily an area of need right now, surprisingly, and that's a very coveted area of a football team is offensive tackle. So another guy that you can kind of stomach losing, although you never like to see it. Jaden Platt's another one that kind of stings to me because you lose Calhoun and Watson to graduation this year, and you're left with Theo Melanorstrom, Donovan Green, and the incoming Keoti Armstrong. It would have been nice to keep a 4th tight end in that room as of now. But right now he's in the portal. Maybe you can get him back. I would suggest that's a priority guy to try to get back into the program that's currently in the portal, whereas some of the other guys you might be more okay letting go and allocating those NIL funds elsewhere. A Jaden Platt would be nice to get back. Jalen Henderson, obviously, running out of eligibility, needs to find playing time elsewhere. Would probably be the backup next year, but, probably should find a starting spot. I think there's clearly a G5 starting spot for Jalen Henderson somewhere if he wants it, if not a competition at the P5 level that he can maybe jump into. Now, Connor Wigman, writing was on the wall as soon as Reed took the job. Wigman's a guy that, what do we need to say? We know he has the ability. We know this year was disappointing for him, and I'm sure he feels the same way. Injury-riddled couple of seasons. He needs a fresh start. He'll find it elsewhere. Some team would love to build around him, even in his current status. It is what it is, man. That's the nature of the beast. You have a 5-star quarterback. He gets beat out. That guy has plenty of opportunity elsewhere. Great bidding war probably for Connor Wigman as well. Aki is a guy that obviously needed to look elsewhere. He's been here since 2020. He was part of that 2020 team as a backup offensive lineman. He was at the Orange Bowl. There's pictures of him posing with the trophy afterwards. Out of eligibility. Needs to find it elsewhere. You understand that kind of guy moving on. Cyrus Allen, similar conversation to Micah Tease earlier. A guy you would have loved to have back. A guy that you would love to have in that room. And Cyrus Allen had a kind of a cryptic tweet right after the Texas game, kind of a disappointed emoji, maybe the Sunday or Monday after the Texas game concluded, indicating that he wasn't necessarily happy with his status on the team. And maybe that was through a conversation before the portal with Elko, with the staff, saying that, yeah, we're going to look for some other receivers to put into this room right now. So if you wanted to look elsewhere, maybe that's an option you might want to explore. I would assume that the team was probably upfront about information like that, being realistic about how the future of the position group looks. And he's going to look elsewhere. And like I said, a guy you would love to have back. But from reports right now, it looks like you're going to have options to fill in the receiver room nicely. But it still has to happen. So you don't want to see anybody leave the receiver room. That goes for Allen as well as it does Tease. And similar conversation with GBD. unfortunate failure to launch for his very promising college career, 5-star talent, connections to the program, really, really good character guy. Injuries held him back, kept him off the practice field, kept him from developing. You wish him the best. Obviously, position of need at D-line now. And, another guy you wish you could have kept, but a guy you understand losing. Not a guy with clear-cut playing time next year because he didn't crack the rotation this year. And it's very feasible that a transfer or a younger player could pass a guy like that up. So you're going to look elsewhere to get playing time. So after looking at all these names, though you're not thrilled about losing anybody, these are all guys who can find better opportunity elsewhere. Most of these guys were backups. I think Cyrus Allen was probably the exception to that rule. Connor Wigman became a backup. TJ Shanahan was starting due to injury at times. These are all guys who need to find a nice home where they can close out their college careers with a very, very positive and productive note. So, again, nature of the beast, this is the game we're playing now. But that's where we're left at as a roster right now. That's all the attrition outside of graduation that you'll have. Let's take a look at some of the portal needs that we're left with after that, knowing what you're losing, knowing what you're bringing back. Let's transition into team needs. And I'm going to rank these from highest priority to lowest priority. And I'm going to kind of divide this in half. This first chunk of players or positions we're going to talk about are your must-grab additions, are your must-add position groups. Starts with receiver, and I'm listing that 1A, and then 1B is going to be defensive end, strong side. So let's talk about receiver first. What you bring back next year, production-wise, is not much. It's Noah Thomas. It's Terry Bussey if you choose to keep him at receiver. Very versatile player. You can obviously do a lot of things with Bussey. But outside of that, Jabri Barber's out of eligibility. Moose Muhammad's out of eligibility. Cyrus Allen's in the transfer portal. And Janae Walker's graduating. And he's out of eligibility. So beyond that, you bring back no productivity in this receiver room. Now, you have guys like Bethel Roman, Jacob Bostic. I think those were guys that were kind of on the cusp of getting into that rotation, would be the next guy in if there was a major injury, the way the roster last stood. But beyond that, you didn't really have anybody playing. Now, you do bring in 3 true freshman receivers, and I think there are a lot of expectations for Jerome Miles to produce early in his college career. While I do think there's still a path for that, I would suggest pumping the brakes because he is coming off of a significant knee injury that held him out of his senior year outside of a couple of games of high school. So he has the build, he has the tools, he has the speed. All 3 freshmen you bring in are track stars, Jerome Miles, Kelshawn Johnson, Tristan Norman. These are guys that can add a lot to the room, but right away, maybe Jerome Miles. And maybe that's a few weeks into the season once he's kind of gotten that injury in the rearview mirror. That's speculation. He could be full go by camp. We don't know that yet. That's to be determined. But I would say pump your excitement brakes a little bit and prepare for this to be a little bit of a journey getting Jerome Miles up to snuff. So if you're looking at next year's rotation as Noah, Bussey, and then the room, whoever pops up, you obviously need to add multiple bodies here. And I'll drop a separate video about receiver. There are rumblings of really, really productive players that A&M has a chance to get right now, but receiver is 1A on this list. You absolutely need them. And more so than just bodies, I would suggest you need some game breakers at receiver. Last season, I would say one of the biggest problems personnel-wise with the offense is that you didn't have a lot of game changers. You didn't have a lot of guys you could just give the ball and say, hey, go make a play. And I think Le'Veon Moss kind of represented that for the entire team. And, Noah Thomas had a couple of good moments, more of a possession receiver, more of a red zone threat. But Bussey was a young guy, had a couple of good moments, didn't really become that explosive threat we needed him to be, and that was asking a lot for a true freshman. You really need some speed guys, and I would suggest you'd be willing to sacrifice a little bit of size for some speed and skills with the ball in their hand, make guys miss, yak, be able to make things happen. And it sounds like some of the targets can accomplish just that. But I could see a couple of these guys producing. I think Bethel Roman has a little bit of that game-changing speed that you want in a receiver right now in this room, a guy that you can, break off a short route for big yards. I think Bethel Roman has that potential. I think he could carve out a role depending on who you bring in. But right now, I think it's 3 guys. I think you need to add 2 really high-quality guys in the portal, and then a third guy that, could contend for playing time as well. And then you kind of look at the room beyond that with Bethel Roman, Bostic, Jerome Miles, or a freshman. And you go from there. So absolutely need receivers. 1B, defensive end. I'm not talking about the edge rush position because I think you have a couple of good bodies there, though you could add to that room too. strong side defensive end, those 260 plus pound run stopping, strong side, run side defensive ends like Nick Scorton filled that role. Shamar Stewart filled that role. Even though those guys had edge rush capability, those guys had that size and that power of a run stopping defensive end. And you really don't have any on the team right now, at least with experience. You have Kendall Jackson and Solomon Williams, who you could argue could fill that role with their size. But those are two unproven young bucks, and you'd be making a huge gamble if you're going into next season banking on those two guys to be the dudes you're going to utilize. Maybe they can carve out a role. Maybe they could compete for a starting spot. But you have to add bodies in that defensive end room. Now, just kind of dipping into that edge rush conversation, there will be scenarios where a Rylan Kennedy and a Cassius Howell, hopefully they both return, they both can return, those guys can play both defensive end positions, but in running downs, first downs, run-heavy teams, you're going to want that bruiser, you're going to want that big body out there, so you're absolutely looking at that in the portal. And like I said, Kendall Jackson, Solomon Williams, great prospects, but you need some experience in that room. So I'm putting 1B, defensive end, strong side, one or two guys, probably two guys there at least. And it sounds like A&M's doing their homework there. You got to believe they're knocking on all these doors. Number 2. So I had number 1 tied defensive end and receiver, 1A, 1B. Now, number 2 priority, defensive tackle. Do you bring Albert Regis back? You really hope so. Very much an unsung hero of the team this year. Just a very consistent, productive, game-affecting player for us. Unfortunately, DJ Hicks had some positive trends the second half of the season, whereas kind of his freshman year, first half of this season, spring, he kind of was in kind of a lull, kind of in a plateau, but then we saw him kind of take off starting with that LSU game and have some good moments from then on, team leaning on him a little bit more and more. But beyond that, though I really like this defensive tackle room, it is very, very young. You have Dalen Evans, Jalen Scarlett. Those are two going to be redshirt freshmen next year. And then you have the true freshmen, DJ Sanders, Chase Sims, and Landon Rink. Now, I would suggest that one or multiple of those young guys could carve out a very productive role next season, even some of the true freshmen. I think I would be surprised if one of DJ Sanders, Chase Sims, or Landon Rink are not in some sort of rotational role next year. I think they have that ability. Especially Chase Sims, DJ, they're all really, really good players. I think A&M did a really, really good job in high school recruiting at this position group, and that's so important in the SEC. Obviously, just the size of bodies, the NFL prospects out there. And, Dalen Evans was a top 160, 247 composite pick coming out of high school last year. He was coming off of an injury entering the team last year, so who knows where his development is. You have to add something in the portal here. You have to add a Rodas Johnson. I think Rodas Johnson is the perfect model to what you want. Rodas wasn't a star at Wisconsin, but he was a multi-year player, a multi-year starter. I think he had played over 30-plus games in his career, tons of snaps under his belt, and he was really effective in a rotational role. That's exactly what you need, and you might need 2 Rodas Johnsons. You might need 2 with how young this room is. You can get by with 1 because, like I said, a lot of promise with these young guys, but when you stack up injuries, when things happen in games, long, grueling season, you probably want a couple of guys with experience in this D-tackle room. But I have this a tier below D-end and receiver because I do really, really like the young room here, and I do think 1 or 2 of those guys will produce. Who knows who it'll be, but I'm actually predicting that 1 or 2 of those guys will be a productive player their freshman or redshirt freshman years. All right, there's no tie for 2. We're going straight to 3. It's tight end because you lose Platt. And Watson graduating, Calhoun graduating. I don't think they have any eligibility left, not that I can tell. And you bring back 3, Thor, Donovan Green, Keoti Armstrong, the true freshman. Now, while I do think Keoti could potentially be a year 1 impact guy, freak jump ball threat coming out of high school, I think he could find a role, especially down the stretch of the year, and especially considering that all the freshmen besides Jerome Miles are early enrollees and will have that extra weight room and just kind of corporate knowledge you gain from being around. 3's not going to cut it for Colin Klein because he uses 3 per game. So you're going to have to add 1 or 2 in the portal here. And I would like a versatile guy, probably maybe a block first, a block heavy guy that you can throw at the H-back role. He loves his H-back. You don't have a fullback on the team. You got to get a versatile tight end in the portal. And I'm sure the team knows that. I'm sure Klein knows that. That's what they want to be. And you don't want to be stuck with 3 because you're an injury away from being schematically away from what you want to do. And that's having a 3 tight end system, what he did all year this year. Now, I have great hopes for Thor. I think he showed some developmental stuff this year. A long way to go. Blocking, strength, and strain. needs to come along. I think he's a very willing blocker, but just the strength there needs to come along quite a bit. And the catching consistency, we saw a big drop versus Auburn, needs to come along. Good job getting open, had some good catches on the year, showed some good technical blocking stuff, but again, just strength. He was a receiver in Sweden. He wasn't a tight end. I don't think the tight end position was really utilized in Sweden from what he was talking about. And then you have Donovan Green. That's a bit of a wild card. Can we bank on him next year? It's a bad injury, man. It's a big guy with a bad injury. Will he be himself next year? And if he is, I mean, shoot, that's like adding a 4-star, tight end in the portal to your team right now if you're not banking on him being back next year. So I don't even know if you can bank on Donovan next year. As much as we love him, as much as, he's a leader and he's all about Aggie land, he's on a real tough journey right now coming back to being Donovan Green. So I don't know if you're banking on that. Therefore, you got to add 2 tight ends in the portal, I would think. Now, I think everything beyond the position groups I just mentioned are significantly less urgent. Now, there's some urgency to some of these, but it's really all about that D-line and wide receiver group and now tight end with Platt in the portal and the graduates. So much less panic or urgency or whatever you want to call it regarding these next. And I'll kind of order these from most important to least as well. But keep in mind, even if you added nobody here, I think you will add people here, you wouldn't be, in hell. So let's start this list off with the edge rushing position. We talked about it a second ago. Cassius Howell, Rylan Kennedy, really, really high-level edge rushers. But beyond that, you need experience. And it sounds like right now A&M is bringing 2 or 3 guys onto campus to visit. So it sounds like A&M's ready to get this kind of player. So edge rusher, you have 2 great guys. I think, honestly, Cassius Howell is an early breakout, like all-SEC candidate next year. I know that sounds very wishful think. I loved his hustle. I loved his willingness to run. I loved how he just always seemed to be productive, whether it was just chasing the quarterback down, putting him on a clock, strip sacks. It's just a very solid player, perfect edge rusher for A&M. And I really expect big things out of Cassius Howell next year, but you need something else in this room, at least a guy, probably 2. But again, happy with those 2, and then you have some young guys coming in too that are really, really promising. Safety, weird one to me. I would like to say that you got a lot of guys coming back, and you really don't need anything. I thought it was a strength of the team going into the year. But they unfortunately really disappointed down the stretch. And I was so high on Dalton Brooks. I was so high on Marcus Radcliffe when we saw glimpses of him first couple games of the year versus Notre Dame. I thought we had a player once he got a few games of experience under his belt. But mistakes became a habit for this group, man. They really did. So while I don't personnel-wise, depth-wise think you need a guy, I think it'd be encouraging to get a guy to push the room, and a pretty high-level guy. I think you really want someone in there to just light a fire under this room and maybe steal a starting spot, because I think it really trended the wrong direction down the stretch of the year. Now, don't get me wrong. I really like Dalton Brooks. We used to really love Bryce Anderson, and we still do in a lot of ways. Just the transition back to safety did not go according to plan. And Marcus Radcliffe, he trended the wrong direction down the stretch. So you do have guys. We just didn't get what we wanted out of them. So I would suggest a solid safety would be a pretty good addition. Offensive line, the room's in great shape, but you lost 2 rotational backups now with great experience, because TJ Shanahan didn't have experience before the year, but after all he did this year, you would say that's a very experienced backup for college. Cam Dewberry, obviously freshman starter in 21, tons of experience. Now, really happy with the room overall. I think one depth guy would help this room out. I don't think it's a huge urgent need. I just think it's really good to have bodies. I think someone equivalent to Kalinu Feu, break glass in case of emergency, maybe a couple years of eligibility left, can play after someone graduates, someone like that. But if you got nobody in the O-line, I think you're just fine. Well, I'll make a separate video about the O-line because there's a lot of panic about that room with some of the portal entries we had today. I'll drop a video about that very shortly. But maybe a guy. Quarterback, you needed an experienced floor raiser. I don't think you were comfortable going in with Miles O'Neill as your backup, and beyond that, you have true freshmen, because we've seen quarterback injuries stack up at this university. A&M did just that already. They have crystal balled Jacob Zeno out of UAB to the program, which means the very in the know insiders have projected he's coming to A&M. He's gonna sign or whatever you call it in the portal. 6 years of experience, starting experience, UAB. I would suggest this is the perfect guy you wanted to add to this room, because clearly you're building around Marcel Reed, and you have a great prospect in Miles O'Neill behind him in case things don't work out, and I do think that's a great place to be. But you needed a vet. You needed someone who was willing to kind of take a back seat, with experience, and that's kind of hard to find. You're not going to get a Jackson Arnold to come, play behind Marcel Reed. You're not going to get a, who's a quarterback in the portal right now? Whatever. Any Power 5 starter who's looking for opportunity, high-profile opportunity elsewhere, to come back Marcel Reed up. Especially not someone with experience. This guy you can get with experience, probably not super high NFL hopes, probably, no NFL hopes almost, but a guy that's willing to come, play behind Marcel, wait for an opportunity to potentially be quarterback one at Texas A&M, maybe a place he had no business being early in his college career, but now as a backup, you're one injury away, and a guy that brings a ton of just, knowledge and wisdom to the room, being this will be a 7th year of college. So perfect guy in Jacob Zeno out of UAB. Hopefully that gets sealed up and done. Crystal ball should be good. Now we're getting into some position groups I'm pretty okay with. Corner, love the room. Ricks, Will Lee, Tyreek Chappelle potentially. Javen Thomas as a backup, and he was dealing with injury this year, we found out from Jay Bateman. I still like the long-term trajectory of Javen Thomas, even though he did get mossed a few times on the year. I really like the rotation here. You still have a couple other guys. You've been recruiting the position really well. I don't think it's super urgent, but I feel like they'll probably add a DB. I feel like they'll probably add a versatile guy that can slide into wherever they need to, just to kind of elevate the floor of the room. But I'm really happy with the corner room. I actually think they ended up, on a pretty positive note when, they got beat at times. You're going to get beat when you're playing the caliber of opponent you're playing. But I would argue a lot of the DB, deficiencies we saw were more safety-based or lack of pass rush-based than corner-based. I'm really happy with the corner room, guys. I would like to hear your thoughts on that. And then two positions I'm honestly good with, linebacker. And I've actually gotten some pushback on this. Scooby Williams coming back. Torrin York probably back for 2 more years. Those are your starters next year, and I know it's a very up and down year. But I think Scooby Williams did progress quite a bit from his days at Florida. I think if Florida had the Scooby that we had this year, they would have been really, really upset with losing him the year before. I think Scooby's on a good path. I think he fixed a lot of his problems. I think consistency is the word here with the linebacker group. Because obviously, Torrin York brings just that great coach on the field attribute, the great guy with the comms in his helmet, really great communicator on the field, and that's invaluable to a team. But he comes with some deficiencies with the size, obviously. And I think Scooby Williams is a great guy to kind of, complement a guy like York. And I think Damian Sanford, you could say the same thing there. But what really makes me comfortable with this position is the prospects of Jordan Lockhart and Tristan Jernigan. I think these two guys could be your linebackers of the future. I think they looked really good in mop-up duty for true freshmen. I thought they looked really, really good on high school tape. And I think these guys, especially Jernigan, have really, really good heads about them. I'm really excited about the room. And you recruited some this cycle. I think you could add a linebacker, obviously, to kind of strengthen that room because I think the Shields is out. But I'm really happy with the future of this room, and I've been feeling that way for a couple of years. You got to see some improvement, and that's going to happen in a year or two in a system. That's going to happen another year of coaching and training. I think we're in a good place with linebacker. If you guys disagree, let me know. And then finally, running back. If everyone stays, you don't have to add anybody, in my opinion, because you have everything you need. You have a 3-headed monster, a rotational group. If Moss returns and he's able to play coming off that injury, whatever the injury is specifically, you have Ruben Owens back, and then you have Amari Daniels as your third. And that's a great stable. That's a game-to-game rotation right there. And now what you have that you would have loved to have this year is a couple of true freshmen to kind of raise the floor of that room. You would have loved to have those guys this year once you were seeing a bunch of attrition in your running back room. And now if you have some injuries stack up, you got a couple of great true freshmen that, will be ready to play in that role. But hopefully you don't have to play them because you have 3 solid options right there. So you come in with 5 scholarship running backs this year. Last year you started with 3, ended up with 2, kind of bounced up to 3 with like a kind of a, getting back into it, Ruben Owens. But if you stay at 5, I feel pretty good. Maybe you could add one. Maybe you could add a depth piece. That's fine. They might do that, but I'm not calling it a priority. But that gets us up to date, guys. What are your thoughts about my report here? I'm just going through what I feel is a priority for the team. If you guys disagree, if you guys agree, let me know in the comments below. This thing will remain in flux because areas we think we're strong now could change quickly if you get more attrition, more guys into the portal. Running back could become a priority. Linebacker could become a priority. Corner could become a priority. But as it sits right now, you're holding on to starters. You're holding on to your mainstays, and you feel like you have a clear picture of what you need to add in the portal. So thank you guys for being here with me. I'll see you in the next few videos. Drop a video about wide receiver, D-line, and O-line here. Probably by the time you're watching this, there's a good chance they're up or about to be up. I'm going to try to record them all tonight. But thanks for being here. Like and sub. See you soon. Gig 'em.